They say some sins are unforgivable. For a young woman in a cold, desolate land, her sin was simply daring to say no. Her punishment, a sack over her head and a shove from a snowy cliff. They meant to bury her in silence, but they never expected. The fall wouldn't be the end, it was only the beginning. This is not the story of a victim, but of a survivor and her war to reclaim the truth from the very men who tried to erase her from the world. The sack reeked of damp earth and moldy potatoes. The darkness wasn't a void. It was a physical thing, thick and pressed hard against her eyelids. She could only hear the heavy breathing of the men, snorting like beasts after a long journey. Someone tightened the rope around her wrists one more time. Not a word was spoken during the entire ascent. Heels ground on gravel, snow crunched under heavy footsteps. One man muttered a curse, then spat on the ground. Then silence again. A silence that wasn't solemn, merely cold. Finally one of them spoke. High enough, a pause. Then another voice, hoarse, older. She's not allowed to crawl up from this place. She couldn't speak. Not because of the sack, but because her jaw had frozen shut after crying for so long in the wind. The crying had started around dawn, and now it must have been dusk. She could feel it in the way the cold sharpened under her skin, like thousands of ice needles. Another voice. Her stepfather's. A voice she recognized like a scar that never healed. She brought shame upon our house. You do what you must. Brought shame for daring to refuse, for daring to say no to a man who smelled of beer and had struck the preacher's own son with a leather belt. They grabbed her, under the arms. She was light. Hunger had made her so. She felt the tips of her boots slip into the void, nothing beneath but freezing air. She swung a leg, kicking something, a shin maybe. A grunt rang out, followed by a burning slap across the back of her head. Her knees buckled. Throw her, someone snapped. It's freezing. My hands are going numb. She tried to scream, but the cold swallowed the sound. A hard shove, and she fell. Snow slammed into her like a white wall, then hard rock, then silence. Time stopped, but she wasn't dead. The sack had caught on something. A gnarled root, a sharp outcrop of rock. It jerked her sideways, sending her off course. She crashed down hard, not the straight fall of death, but the shattering impact of a betrayed body, one not yet ready to give up on life. She lay motionless for a moment. Then breath returned in ragged, shallow gasps. Hands still bound, face still covered. She shifted a shoulder and felt a sharp pain. A broken rib, or maybe her spirit. Above, the voices were gone. They thought she was dead. She was supposed to be. She lay there, half her body buried in the damp snow, shaking not from will but from instinct. In her ears was the hum of silence. Her blue dress, now just a cold layer of cloth clinging to her skin. The cold was no longer indifferent now. It gnawed at her, aggressive as if angered that its prey still breathed. She rolled over, inch by inch, until her face was pressed to the earth. Through the rough cloth, her lips touched the dust of the ground. She tasted it. The taste of dirt, parched, cold, and real. Then the wind rose, belatedly, whistling through the rock outcroppings like a long repressed whisper. It seemed to carry a name. Her name, Mabel. It surfaced in her mind, the one thing no one could take away. She remembered the sheriff declaring in front of the church, "Mine." And no one had spoken up. No one had asked her. Blood began to run from her nose, dampening a patch of the sack, warming then growing cold again. She tried to move her fingers. Useless. They were frozen sticks of wood. But her legs were different. They still obeyed, enough for her to push herself. She moved on all fours, like a wounded creature. The slope was cruel. For every inch she gained, she slid back half. Snow filled her boots, scraped against the cuts on her skin. Her sinews screamed. She screamed too, but on the inside. The tears were all gone. Then a snort, very close. Her entire body froze solid. A wolf? Another crunch in the snow. Footsteps. Hoofbeats. Her vision was still black, but a scent arrived, filling the air. The smell of a horse, of sun-dried leather. A smell of life, warm and familiar. A voice, not one of the others. Low and quiet. She flinched. A hand rested on her shoulder, not rough. Just a gentle weight. She recoiled out of instinct, fear. Shamed that the voice didn't speak again. Just the rustle of a coat. Then a thick, heavy fabric was draped over her back. Fur. And then warmth. A shock of warmth spreading through her soaked clothes. She tried to breathe, tried to speak, but her throat was raw, and only a dry cough came out. The person slid their arms under her, careful with her injured side. She wanted to protest, to ask where they were taking her, to say she didn't trust men anymore. But she couldn't form the words. The person didn't ask her name, nor did they pull off the sack. They lifted her as gently as if she were just a form, made of cold and memory, and carried her through the thick snow. The creak of leather, the snort of the horse, then a lurch as she was placed on the saddle. She was laid sideways in front of the person. The fur was wrapped tightly around her. Her back was against the person's chest. She could feel the beat of another heart. Slow, steady, nothing like the panting breaths of those who had left her. Time passed in a fog of pain and drowsiness. She didn't know how long they had been riding, only felt the steady rhythm of the horse beneath her. At times she passed out, her body going limp, and a steady arm would catch her, not to possess. Just to hold her to this world. Then, movement stopped. A creak of old hinges. The smell of fire and dry pine resin. Somewhere, the faint aroma of a hot stew drifted. The person didn't speak, just gently carried her inside. She was laid down on a soft surface, maybe a straw bed or a pile of old blankets. She heard the splash of water in a metal basin. The sound of a cloth being dipped, then wrung out. A damp cloth wiped gently at her face, through the sackcloth. The person did not take it off. The person also did not touch the rope that bound her wrists. She heard the sound of heavy boots being placed on the wooden floor, then the sound of a wooden chair being dragged across it. The person sat down. She could feel their presence in the room, not a prying gaze, just a nearby existence, a silent watch. Her lips parted. A dry, wordless sound escaped. The person moved. A warm object was placed on the floor, right beside her numb fingers. A tin cup. Its warmth was the first thing she truly felt with clarity. She gathered all her remaining strength, trying to lift her hand toward that warmth. But her muscles did not obey. Silence again. Only the crackling of the fire in the hearth. Outside, the wind howled through the gaps in the walls, as if winter itself were sighing right beside her ear. In the warmth of the fire and that silent presence, she finally sank into sleep. This time she woke not from pain. She woke to the silence. The sack was still there, a final shell between her and the outside world. Why? Maybe the person didn't want to take her final choice away. The hearth still radiated a gentle warmth. The air held the smell of weak coffee and clean water. She tried to move her wrists. The rope had slackened. The cloth beneath was soft and damp. Someone had soaked them, so they no longer cut into her flesh. She forced herself to sit up. The room spun. Her trembling fingers found the knot behind her neck. Cold and stiff. She fumbled, pulled hard. The rough fabric slid off. Light flooded her eyes, making her squint. A small room, dark wood walls, neat and orderly. The chair where the man had sat still held an impression. His boots stood neatly by the hearth. And then her eyes stopped on a corner. On a neatly folded blanket, there was a wool glove. Turmeric yellow. a woman's size, frayed at the fingertips. Something inside her, which had frozen into ice, began to crack. She didn't cry, but she could feel the tears trying to find a way out. Footsteps on the porch. A wave of panic washed over her. Her eyes darted to the dirty sack. It lay there beside the hearth, but she didn't reach for it. Not this time. The door opened. The man stepped inside. He was not old. His face held no cruelty. He looked at her, looked straight at her swollen and bruised face, and did not flinch. No pity, no disgust. Just a slight nod, as if he knew she was there all along, behind that cloth. He did not speak. She remained silent. He walked past her, placed a log on the fire, then poured water into a cup. He again placed it on the floor beside her. This time, she reached out. Her hand trembled so much the water in the cup sloshed, but she held it. She drank, sip by sip. He still didn't help, letting her do it herself. Outside, snow began to fall again, but the flakes this time looked soft, almost like a mending of space dot, and for the first time since the cliff, since the accusations, she no longer felt like a lesson or a punishment. She was just a person who was alive. She didn't speak for 3 days, not out of pride, nor out of fear. Silence had become a layer of armor, safer than any word. The cabin was small, but it breathed. It breathed around her like a quiet animal, warm but watchful. The fire in the hearth never died. The pot on the stove was never empty. And every time she opened her eyes, the man was there, but never looking directly at her. He moved like someone used to caring for fragile things, things that could shatter with one wrong touch. She learned his rhythm. Before dawn, the sound of an axe splitting wood. Mid-morning, he would saddle the dun horse and disappear into the snow-covered hills. By noon, he would be back with a few rabbits or some jerky. Never bloody, never loud. The first time she tried to stand, her knees folded. He didn't rush forward, didn't use his hands to hold her. Instead, a wooden chair was pushed forward, perfectly catching her just as she fell. A precise and touchless action. She hated herself for flinching as his shadow fell near. He saw it, and he never came that close again. Her name hadn't been spoken aloud since the day they threw her. She held it in her mouth like a bitter secret. He never asked. He would just offer her a piece of bread, a can of beans, and nod. That was the extent of their conversation. On the third night, as she sat by the fire and watched him stitch a torn saddlebag, she asked, "Where is this?" He didn't look up. "My home." It wasn't a statement of power, just a simple fact. She swallowed. "You live alone?" A pause. Then he said, "From time to time." She waited, but he offered no more. Their first conversation ended just like that. But it made the cabin feel less like a stranger's house, and more like a waiting room for whatever came next. On the 4th day, she saw her reflection in a pan of melted snow. The bruises had started to fade, turning a sickly yellow like spoiled fruit. Her lip had scarred over. But her hair was still a tangled mess, and she still looked like a girl forgotten at the bottom of a cliff dot in a drawer. She found an old pair of shears used for shearing sheep. She went outside, stood in the snow, and cut. Chunks of hair fell, messy and uneven. It was not an act of beautification. It was an act of devastation. He made no comment when she came back inside. But that evening, she saw a wooden comb lying beside the stack of blankets. A message without sound. On the 5th day, she pushed the door and stepped outside. The sky was still there. The hills were still there. The world had not stopped to wait for her. The pine trees stood silent like sentinels of the centuries. Far in the distance, a coyote howled, its sound wrapping around her spine like a warning. She walked along the edge of the clearing, not daring to go too far from the cabin. Sometimes, when a strong gust of wind blew, she felt the ground beneath her feet drop for a beat, as if the edge of the cliff were still somewhere very close. Then she saw him, He was mending a fence post at the edge of the tree line, sleeves rolled up, his shirt damp with sweat despite the cold. His movements had a patience to them, as if the work wasn't the goal, but just a reason to keep his hands busy and stop his mind from wandering. That night, she asked, "What should I call you?" He added wood to the fire, watching the sparks fly up. Ronan. The name sounded solid and old, like pine bark. She did not say her name. He did not ask Dot on the 6th day. There was a knock on the door. In the stillness of the cabin, the sound rang out like a gunshot. She froze. Ronan was already on his feet, rifle in hand. Not aimed, just ready. Outside stood a woman, wrapped in a dark green cloak, her face weathered and her lips pursed as if she'd just tasted something bitter. "Brought eggs," she said, her voice curt. Ronan didn't take them. The woman's gaze slid past Ronan and fixed on her. It wasn't a curious look. It was an appraising look, a judging look, and it tightened around her like a noose. "Didn't know you had company." "Just a guest," Ronan replied, his voice even. The woman narrowed her eyes. "A guest or someone the sheriff is looking for." "Number 1 answered. "The whole town's talking, Ronan. Says you're keeping a girl here, a girl who's supposed to be in the ground." Ronan shifted slightly, blocking the woman's view. "The eggs you can leave. As for the judgment, take it back with you." The woman's jaw worked, but in the end, she slammed the basket down on the porch and turned away. When the door closed, Mabel looked down at her hands. They were trembling uncontrollably. "She knew," she whispered. "The whole town knows." Sleep wouldn't come. That night, the cabin was no longer a sanctuary. Every crackle of wood in the hearth was a footstep outside the door. Every howl of the wind was the voice of the men on the cliff. She couldn't stay. She couldn't let this place be tainted because of her. She slipped on her boots, hastily grabbed the shawl. She brought nothing with her. But when she cracked the door open, he was there. Sitting on a log, the rifle across his lap, silent as a part of the winter night. He spoke, his voice low and without looking at her. "They won't find you here, unless you want them to." Her voice broke. "I don't want you to get into trouble because of me. I'm not afraid of them, but I am." He finally turned, looking straight at her. "You weren't supposed to survive," he said. "I know," he nodded slowly. "Then let me help you become someone else, someone who doesn't need to be afraid." She stepped back inside Dot the next morning. She found a sheet of paper, a bottle of ink, and a pen on the table. "Paper and ink can go places a voice cannot," he said. "And it stays there. What would I write?" she asked. He looked into her eyes, steady. "Whatever makes you free." She stared at the blank page for a long time. Then she wrote. Not for the sheriff. Not for her stepfather. She wrote for the girl who was left on the cliff, so she would not be forgotten. Line after line, truth after truth. Later, while Ronan was out getting wood, she found it. Hanging behind the door, an old yellow dress. The fabric was stained, the hem torn. She took it out, sat by the hearth. With a needle and thread, she began to mend her life, one stitch at a time, through the fabric yellowed like sunlight. She repaired the tears, reinforced the frayed seams. She sewed until her fingers ached. When Ronan returned, he paused in the doorway. She didn't look up, just continued her work. He let her be, let her finish, let her return to herself. By dusk, she was standing in the yard in that yellow dress, watching the snow fall. The flakes now fell slowly and quietly. She was no longer afraid they would bury her. Inside, Ronan threw another log on the fire. Neither of them said it, but a war had been declared in the silence. The first time she went back to town, the snow had begun to melt, revealing the muddy ground and the secrets winter had tried to cover. Mabel wore the yellow dress she had sewn back together. The stitches were clumsy in places, but it was the only thing with real color in this gray town. It was like a small flame in a field of ash. She walked beside Ronan while he led the horse. His coat flapped in the wind. No one said why they were going. It was simply time. The town of Birch Hollow hadn't changed. Still the same crooked chapel with its peeling white paint. Still the same saloon with one of its shutters missing. The air here was thick with gazes. A place where people knew everything but did nothing. Mabel didn't look at them, but she could feel their eyes. Some widened in disbelief. Others narrowed in judgment. The sheriff's horse stood tied outside the blacksmith's, its breath steaming in the cold air. Ronan kept walking. He didn't take her hand, didn't shield her. He simply walked beside her, no faster, no slower. His presence a silent affirmation. The general store smelled of raw tobacco and dust. When they entered, all sound in the store ceased. The sudden silence was louder than speech. As if they were two stones thrown into a still pond. Old man, Whittle behind the counter, blinked twice, slow as tree sap. "Ronan," he said, his voice cautious. "Morning, Duck." His eyes flicked to Mabel, then quickly away. "Heard. You have company." Ronan placed a sack of flour on the counter. "Need lard and some nails." Mr. Whittle didn't move. "Is that the girl?" he asked. "The one that. Mabel didn't speak. Neither did Ronan. "It's just. People are talking," Mr. Whittle trailed off. Ronan placed the coins on the counter. "People also talked a lot," he said, his voice even. "When your daughter ran off with that horse trader, with 3 other wives elsewhere." The silence that followed had weight. Mr. Whittle bagged the goods without another word. Outside, the street had grown quieter. The news was spreading like a contagion. She passed a mirror in the seamstress's window and didn't recognize herself. That was the point. And at the end of the street, the blacksmith's door creaked open. The sheriff stepped out, squinting in the daylight, and a smile spread across his face when he saw her. He put his hands on his hips, a look of smug ownership. Well, he said, the smirk not hiding his triumph. He said her name, the way a man says the name of his horse. Mabel Holton. Ronan kept walking. The sheriff stepped off the boardwalk, planting himself in the middle of the road like a rotten tree. "You know you belong to me, girl. Your father promised." "I have the papers." "No," she said. The sound came out weakly, but it had the heat of a freshly struck match. He laughed. A loud, hollow sound. "It doesn't matter if you say yes or no. The law is on my side. I was bound and thrown into a ravine." "I don't know what you're talking about." Ronan just shifted his feet one step. A small, almost unnoticeable movement. But it changed everything in the space between them. The sheriff's gaze moved to Ronan. "You want to start something over this girl?" "I am listening to her speak," Ronan replied. A crowd began to gather, silent and curious. Worried adults, children who didn't understand. "I could have you charged for harboring a fugitive," the sheriff growled. "She is not a fugitive," a voice called out from the side. From the apothecary porch, Mrs. Godwin spoke up, her voice clear. "A fugitive doesn't tie her own hands, Mr. Sheriff. Those marks don't come from nowhere." Murmurs began to ripple through the crowd. The sheriff's jaw twitched. He stepped closer to Mabel, so close she could smell the cheap whiskey on his breath. "You're going to regret this." She didn't back away. Instead, she reached into her coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She placed it on the hitching post, weighing it down with a small stone. "My testimony," she said, "with witness signatures. You never filed a marriage contract. You just gave my father money." He glanced at the paper, and his face went pale. "You planned this." "I was finding a way to live," she answered. "I think she has." A steady voice rang out. The preacher appeared. At the chapel door, wearing no coat, just his vestments and a silver cross that glinted. "Because now we have all heard. And that makes it our business. All of our business. We have been silent long enough." A hush fell over the street. Ronan turned. To her, a silent nod. It was time. She stepped forward, walking past the sheriff, past the crowd, past all the whispers they had once used to drown her. No one dared to stop her. They reached the edge of town before she finally exhaled. "I used to think I would never." "Come back here," she said. "You came back," Ronan replied. "No," she said, looking back at the town behind her. It was still there, but its power over her had vanished. "I came back as myself." The sky above the cliff was the same gray as the day they threw her down. This time she climbed on her own. Ronan walked behind, keeping a distance not of strangeness, but of respect. He was not her protector. He was her witness. She came to the exact spot. She knew it. The rock where she had hit her side, the branch that had caught her sack. She unrolled the paper on a flat boulder and held it down with a pebble. An indictment nailed to the scene of the crime. They arrived soon after. The sheriff, his 2 deputies, and her stepfather trailing behind. Word in town traveled faster than a horse. "Well," the sheriff said, a smile without joy. "How poetic." She didn't answer. "You know what this looks like," he continued. "Trespassing. Interfering with a lawful marriage." "There was no marriage," Mabel said, her voice carrying on the wind. "Only a dirty transaction and a rope." He took a step forward. "Who do you think you are now? Parading around in that ragged dress like some kind of saint?" "I think that I breathed," she said, "and that bothers you." He stopped. "You should have stayed down there," I tried. But then I realized the fall didn't kill me. It was the silence. After that almost did. Her stepfather muttered something. "Shut it," the sheriff barked. Mabel's eyes flicked to Ronan, who stood at the bottom of the hill, arms folded, quietly trusting her. She turned back to the sheriff. "You don't scare me anymore," he laughed. "I don't need to scare you. I just need to say you're mine, and half the town will believe it. They didn't back me last time because they thought I let you die. But now you're here, showing this face. If I put you down again, they'll call it justice. A hysterical woman. The law doesn't favor ghosts." He took another step, his hand drifting toward his gun. She didn't flinch. She lifted her chin. "So do it, but this time you have to do it carefully. Because I don't fall a second time." The 2 deputies glanced at each other. One of them swallowed hard. "No," a voice echoed from the slope. Ronan was there. He had appeared almost from the air, silent as the snow, the rifle in his hand, its barrel pointed at the ground. "But she's right." The sheriff whipped around. "You dare threaten an officer of the law, and you?" Ronan asked in return. "You dare threaten a girl?" Mabel kept her eyes on the deputies. "Do you boys want to die for a man? Who throws women off cliffs?" They didn't answer. The sheriff's hand hovered, shaking, near his revolver. He took a slow step back. "You're not worth the bullet," he finally spat out. "No," she answered. "But I was worth having the truth spoken." He turned, spat on the ground, then stomped down the slope, shoving past Ronan. The 2 deputies followed. Hastily. Her stepfather lingered for a moment, looked up at her, but she didn't look back until he dropped his eyes and turned away. When they were gone, the wind shifted. Ronan reached the top of the hill. He said nothing, just stood beside her, watching the empty trail. Mabel took the paper, folded it carefully, and tucked it inside her coat. "They won't come back," she said. "No," he replied. He looked toward the tree line. "Ready to go home?" She nodded once. They walked down together. Her boots stepped exactly into his footprints in the snow, not because she needed him to lead the way, but because he had gone first to make her path easier. At the edge of the woods, she turned to look one last time. Behind her, the cliff stood. Mute. No more ghosts, no more whispers. Only the sky, the stone, and a girl who would never fall again.